Look, it's my friend Mark Mlligan.
Hey there, Larry. How are you doing?
Great to see you. Where are you located these days?
In the north of England, away from the madding crowd, whilst we're all in lockdown.
And how's it been going for you these last 6+ months?
It's been a game of two halves, I think. The first few months were chaotic and huge amounts of change and uncertainty. And then the last 3 months has been sort of real sort of period of lots of excitement in the industry, lots of inbound interest, and yeah, we've just seen a huge amount of people getting interested in the business that weren't there before.
Yeah, excellent. Let's get right into our questions then. Mark, how has the entertainment spend across the entire, value chain and sector been reallocated during the pandemic, in your view?
So there's been really a couple of phases. So the first phase, when everything went into lockdown, there was just a lot of holding back. People didn't really know what was going to happen. So some spending just stopped. One of the biggest changes, of course, was footfall in city centres. So as a result of people not being there, a lot of businesses that would have otherwise had a custom didn't. And in terms of how that impacted the music, well, even if live venues hadn't been in lockdown, they just wouldn't have had as many people walking past and, to drop in, etc. As the lockdown extended and people became a little bit more familiar and some of the restrictions eased off, we started to see people doing things they hadn't done before. So if we look at, for example, one of the examples I like to look at is we look at Disney and Live Nation in Q2.
Let's have a look at that. You have a slide, I think,
yeah,
to help us get a sense.
And I think it gives us a really good sense of an illustration, if you like, the big changes that are happening. So what we have is Disney and Live Nation losing between them in the quarter the nearly $10 billion compared to where they were 1 year previously. But then at the same time, if you just want to sort of click on the slide a couple of times to build it, then at the same time, we look at Home Depot, which increased its revenue by 7.2 billion. Now, these aren't like for like, there's different geographies involved and a whole bunch of sort of, supply chain issues. But if you just build the slide one more time again, there is this big question is, if money is being spent elsewhere, is it going to come back? And how much it will come back? How long will it take for it to come back? If somebody started renovating their home, then, they may carry on doing that project instead of then going and spending money on being able to go back to Disneyland when it's open. When people have stopped going to live concerts because they can't, and then they suddenly can again, do they still have enough income? Have they lost their job, as a recession bites in? If you're an older music fan and you're more at risk of developing health complications from COVID, then maybe you're going to be even more concerned about, I don't care how much social distancing there is, I'm just nervous about being in a public space with lots of other people. So I think if there's one bit of certainty here, it is that there's going to be a lot more uncertainty. The one last bit I'd say, which is really interesting, is that what we saw was COVID acted as an innovation catalyst. So a lot of things that were there before have started happening at a faster rate or being adopted at a faster rate. So we all know there's like things like Zoom and everything else really sort of, rocketed really early. But we saw digital transitions beginning to accelerate. A good example is AMC cinema chain. Over the same period as we're looking at the data for Live Nation, etc., lost, some $1.5 or so billion. Over the same time, Netflix gained more than that.
Sure.
And so there's lots of these transitions which have been accelerated. We've seen CD sales falling through the floor because people aren't in the shops to go and buy them. And of course, we've seen really solid growth from streaming over the same period, at least in subscriptions. So to sum it up, some money's gone elsewhere and may take some time to come back. And the transition to digital has accelerated.
Let's talk about the live business for just a few minutes. Although everyone is taking their share of pain at the moment, some more than their fair share, and even facing an existential crisis, the largest of the companies, the Live Nations of the world, are somewhat insulated from the pointiest edge of the pandemic as a result of their balance sheet and their access to capital. Why does the pandemic dynamic represent an artist development problem, as you've written?
Yeah, so I think if we think about live there's obviously lots of reasons live is different from recording, but there's one really important bit, and that is it's a tiered, hierarchical business where there are different sized venues that reflect where you are as an artist. You know, and when an artist is trying to break to that next level, they'll do the next sort of size of venues up. It's this really clear strata of you're going to be at clubs, you're going to be at theatres, you know, all the different things that reflect how big you are or how big you want to be and how big you're trying to be. And lots of those smaller venues, you know, these are the ones which don't tend to be within, you know, within the orbit of the really big live companies. They're crucial for artists getting going. You know, they're the ones where artists really hone their skills as a performing artist, but it's also where they start to build the fan bases, and you know, and they also, you know, it's where their songs become the finished product as they keep testing them out night after night. If you're a really big venue or a big live company like Live Nation, you can go and get finance to get you through this difficult period. But if you're a small little venue, it's way harder to get that sort of money. And then whenever the time is that you get to reopen, you're having to open with social distancing measures in place. Well, most of those small venues make their money on the you know, the drinks and food and, you know, the concessions and the merch. They don't make the money on the tickets. If you've got fewer people there, that's obviously fewer people to go and spend on all those other sort of things. They're already going into the thing not having made money on tickets, and they've got half as many people there, but probably just as many staff to go and enforce all of the social distancing, etc.
Sure.
It may well become really difficult, if not impossible, for many smaller venues to actually be able to operate, you know, viably. So, worst case scenario, a year or two from now, we could see many of those smaller venues disappear, hopefully temporarily, but nonetheless disappear out of the market, which means that if you're a big established artist, there's still places to go and play. If you're a smaller artist, then you just haven't got those venues to play anymore. And that means if those artists don't have the place where they can go and cut the teeth, then we could have this sort of generational gap. It would almost be, you know, sort of a, you know, a lost generation of music artists as live artists.
You've written that streaming, which you mentioned earlier, helped the live business until it didn't. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is throughout the last 10 years and beyond, streaming has grown, but live music has continued to grow. And live has been the way that most established artists make the majority of their income. And so they never really had to pay that close an attention to streaming in terms of their royalties, other than to know it's getting bigger every year and it's a really meaningful chunk of money. And it, well, you know, it can be, you know, the difference between them, you know, sort of having a, you know, a good year and an okay year, but it's live, which is really, you know, what is paying the bills. And streaming used to have a symbiotic relationship with live. In the old days, the way that you build a fan base is persuading enough people to go and buy your album or buy your singles. And that took some time, and it took marketing support and all those sort of things. And it also meant there was a fairly small base of people, because it's the people who've gone and bought your album. Now, with streaming, many more people are going to listen to the music that you release. Probably not albums anymore for the majority of artists, but nonetheless, people are going to go and listen. Many more people are going to listen, and then they like you on streaming. They're then more likely to go and see you play live. And so you end up with what streaming was doing, was generating a decent amount of royalty income, but crucially was making the live pie bigger for most artists. And then lockdown happens, and suddenly artists are having to rely upon streaming as probably the majority income stream, and realizing it's not enough on its own. And they start to say, well, hang on, how do we go from millions or tens of millions of streams to thousands of dollars of royalties? And they start, well, that doesn't really sort of seem to add up. And then we have the birth of the broken record debate. And without going into massive amounts of detail there, it is not easy. It is complicated. There are many, many different moving parts. But there's a fundamental thing which artists will just have to learn to understand, that streaming is like an annuity. It is something that delivers to you over a long period of time. So it's never going to feel like selling an album, you know, unless you're a big superstar artist who has a super global hit. Most of what artists are going to get from streaming is a slower amount of income spread over a long period of time, but hopefully adding up to a similar amount of money. But really, Streaming isn't enough for artists on their own. It can't be, never will be. So we need live to get there quicker, and we need some plan Bs in terms of what other ways artists can make money.
Fair enough. So, speaking again about the live music business and the infrastructure of the live business in urban cores in particular, what do you think we're looking at in terms of music cities and music places as we get through and hopefully toward recovery from the pandemic next year and after that?
So I mentioned before about how COVID was like a catalyst for change. And, again, it's a catalyst most of the time, not a creator of change. It's catalyzing things which are already beginning to happen. So if you look at the long view of history, most societies start off as being rural agrarian societies. And as the society industrializes, people flock to the cities, cities grow up around that. And now in most Western markets, we're very much in a post-industrial era. And so we've already started to see people move out of, many cities, or at least the commuter belts around those cities get bigger. Of course, what happened with COVID, it forced so many people to be remote working, and it supercharged all of the remote working technologies like video conferencing, etc. And luckily, most people have decent enough connections to be okay most of the time for calls and whatever else. So we found out that actually it's much less important, and we probably still thought it was, to be based in a city, working in an office, to be able to effectively work, in global, let alone national businesses. So we're seeing this, beginning to see this exodus from cities, people moving further and further out of cities in order to be able to work remotely and occasionally commute into those cities. What that means is there's going to be less natural footfall. So if you're a smallish venue that regularly has music on, or a bar that regularly has bands playing, the sort of crowds that you're getting are not people who are coming, yes, that band is playing and I've got that date in my diary. It's, oh, great, go and see some music tonight. Let's see who's on, and then go from the office and whatever else. A lot of that will go. The weekend footfall is going to be much less as well if fewer people are living in the cities. And if we couple that with what I was saying before about the many of those smaller venues may end up closing, if the recession and lockdown persists for any amount of time. Well, you could end up with this longer term picture where actually different kinds of venues, do better in different places, and you might see some venues go into the new places where the commuters have moved to, and etc. I think the only thing that you could say is probably going to be pretty safe are really big venues. The really big venues which put on tentpole events where people will drive from afar, book, possibly a year in advance to go and see. And that, I suppose, is just sort of like what we've already been seeing in retail, and in dining and whatever else, with more and more of these sort of out of town places. So that, I think, is we will see a dilution of the sort of, city music scene. So maybe they're disappearing. It's just there may be fewer venues because there'll be less footfall, because we won't be spending as much time in cities.
Do you think there's a role for government and policymakers here?
There is absolutely a role. How far that role goes is another question. So if we look at things like opera and theatre, those are sectors which more traditionally have sort of state grants and support. They're recognised as being important cultural entities, but don't necessarily have the scale of audience to always be able to run financially sustainably themselves. I don't think we would want to get to a position where contemporary live music, the lower end of the scale at least, was something which was permanently non-commercially sustainable or commercially viable and required permanent support. However, if governments are able to take a mid-term view of saying, we recognise the importance of these small venues, that we know that it's going to be difficult for them to be commercially viable for maybe 3 to 4 years, and we will work out a way to ensure they stay there. There's a number of grants which are in market, which are quite short term. It's focused about getting through this COVID problem.
Sure.
Really, the COVID problem is going to have impact of years on those small venues. I think that's the role that those government role to be played, which is extend the period of support long enough for small venues to become commercially sustainable. But it's got to be done in a way that those small venues do not become dependent develop a dependency of state aid. Otherwise, that just damages the viability of the sector.
It's critical in the short run, essential, since so many of the smaller venues are facing an existential crisis, and many have already announced that they're closing, and we don't want to lose permanent music infrastructure wherever possible.
It does happen. I think back to, the Marquee Club in London, which played, it's like, people like Jimi Hendrix played in those, and whatever it was, 15 years or so ago, turned into a pub and is now just a nondescript pub on the street. It can happen when those venues are still alive. They feel so important that you could not imagine them not being there, but they can just disappear like that.
Let's talk a little bit about technology and alternative revenue streams during the pandemic. How is live streaming technology evolving? What's happening? Is that an opportunity for live streamers?
Again, this is one of those catalysts, COVID catalysts. So live streaming has been struggling to get a foothold. And I'd elevate this beyond live streaming. I'd talk about virtual concerts. So in there, let's put live streaming, let's put in-game appearances, VR, AR, virtual worlds, all this sort of things with various different ways that, various different events have been put on for a while. A lot of that been struggling for a role in the market. And one of the reasons they've been struggling is the live music value chain is incredibly structured, and it's really difficult to break your way into it. And if you're a big successful live company, why would you want to do something that might damage your really nice booming business to try to go and do something which could potentially be threatening and competitive? This is not to criticize live businesses, it's natural business sense. You go back to when Spotify first started emerging, the record label did not want to kill off CDs. When CDs started emerging, they did not want to kill off, so Spotify killing off downloads, and then downloads before that killing off CDs. You always want to protect what you call revenue streamers. So it was really difficult for live streaming to get going, and you had patchy quality and everything else. We go into COVID and lockdown, we've still got patchy quality. We've still got this lots of variety in the quality of the experience that's delivered, but it's now got a purpose. It's got two purposes. One, the only one which I would argue it's been doing well at so far, is a purpose of maintaining that connection between the artists and the fans. And that, to me, says as much about the failing of the digital marketplace as a whole as it does about the cessation of live. That there wasn't a natural place where artists and fans could really feel like, that they had a place to be together. What it hasn't done is create a viable alternative to live. And what I mean by that is it just hasn't been done systematically enough. It's just very much like, so you hear a phrase a lot about, it's like the Wild West out there. So the analogy of the Wild West is when the trucks first sort of went across, over to the West and they first started settling, there wasn't any infrastructure. And then eventually, once a town got big enough, a sheriff would come into town. And once a sheriff had been there and the railroad started coming and eventually become a state and, and all the laws would come, I think live streaming is very much, we haven't even got the sheriff in town yet, so everybody's just trying things their own ways, and lots of mistakes have been made, because live music is the most valuable income stream for most artists. It's a premium, scarce product, which is normally high quality production values. Live streaming has been done with none of those things. So your favorite artists, you could only see them when they're coming to your town. Live streaming, you can see them, 5 days a week if they're playing 5 days a week. And some of the quality could be really patchy, and and if you see too much of your artist, you lose that sort of the essence that scarcity delivers. So I think there's loads that can be done. Simple things which we're beginning to see done is some geofencing, so that there is a limited amount of availability in different territories, ticketed, because this is a premium product. So let's ensure that the premium, high quality versions are ticketed, and we don't spend our time educating consumers that live streaming is something you get for free. And then just lots more innovation about the format itself. I think anybody who likes sports and has been watching any of the sports during lockdown will have seen lots of sports with lots of empty seats around. So what does that do? It's just reminding you this is an inferior, poorer quality version of what used to have crowds with it. Well, actually, it's the same for sports and for live. Stop pretending that it's the old thing and make it something different and new. Make it a televised first experience. You don't need empty seats around you. It doesn't need to be in a venue. You can use production values like you would put on TV shows, etc. So I think there's huge amount of innovation to come. I think games titles will possibly become tomorrow's live music venues in a lot of ways. The way that Fortnite has only carved this out so far, Minecraft a little bit, but I think there's a lot more that can happen there, where different types of games will be different virtual venues for different types of fan bases.
Can we talk about VR for a minute? Over the last several years, you've written that VR is a technology that has been living through the trough of disillusionment.
Yeah.
Is now a time when VR finally finds a killer app or a use case?
So I would say that we're now on the next thing on that hype cycle is the slope of enlightenment, and I think we're absolutely have the potential to be there. And I think we've definitely got a use case. Do we have sufficient installed base of people with the headsets? Do we have sufficiently good quality experiences being delivered? I think they're still unknowns. The fact that we've seen MIDiA VR, acquire Napster, then it's creating a platform in which it can reach large volumes of users. Are there things that MIDiA VR can do as gateway drugs into VR for those users? Ones that will persuade them they need to be going and buying headsets, etc. So it might be that just live streaming of concerts is an interim step that MIDiA VR could be getting into with now, etc. So yeah, long answer made short. This is a moment it can capitalize upon. We're not there yet.
Okay. Let's zoom back out and talk about the economic phenomenon that we are undoubtedly facing, which is a recession of unknown depth and severity following the pandemic. How do recession economics complicate the prospects for recovery after the pandemic?
Yeah, so there's a concept around coming out of a recession, and it's something that's called economic scarring. So you hear politicians saying, "We're going to bounce back. This is going to be, a bounce back at the end of the recession." There has never been a recession in history where there's been a proper bounce back, i.e., everybody just gets back on their feet again.
Right.
What happens with a recession is some companies die, some product formats die, some outlets die. There's a whole bunch of companies and products and services that don't make it. And so when the economy grows again the other side, it's not just some companies recovering, it's new ones which have seen new opportunities that then grow as well. So the net effect is the economy looks like it's growing, but there will have been absolutely both losers to go alongside the winners in that. All the things we were talking about earlier on about the, some of the transitions and, more shifts to digital and whatever else, all of those things suggest that if we treat lockdown as having been a pre-recession, because it had characteristics of a recession, but it's also causing and triggering a recession. We've got a whole bunch of behaviors which have been established and look like they're going to sustain to some degree or another as we're more remote-based working and all of those kinds of things. Then I think it'd be a reasonably safe bet to assume accelerated shifts to digital, prolonged struggle for live, some streaming services with subscriptions being more resilient than streaming services that rely upon ad-supported. Those are the sort of things which are going to continue. But in terms of will things get worse, I think the real bit there is the impact on the workforce. So the people who lose their jobs first in a recession tend to be younger people. And of course, the 25 to 34 is the core demographic that pays for music subscriptions. So if millennials find themselves disproportionately hit in the workforce, then the subscriber bases there are going to be at risk. At the very least, we will see increased churn and slower growth rates, if the workforce is significantly impacted. The winners, I think, will be Amazon with Prime, because it's a bundle that gives you so much value for money, and value for money is something which is doubly important during a recession. And it's a utility because it's still going to get you all your stuff delivered to home. And we need more things delivered to home because we're spending less time going out driving because of the habits that we've picked up during lockdown and continued with remote working. And it's an annual subscription. So even if you decided, oh yeah, I want to go and cancel it, but you've already paid for it for the year. So hopefully by the time that you need to think about renewing it, the recession's over, you've got your job back or whatever it might be. Compare that to a Netflix subscription or a Spotify subscription. Spotify subscription, cancel it like that. And if you cancel it, well, it's still Spotify free. Oh, and there's YouTube, and if you're in the US, there's Pandora, and there's Mixcloud and SoundCloud, and all of these great ways to go and find free music. So I think what I would say is, so far, streaming has been lockdown resilient. The early signs are that it's reasonably insulated from the recession as it is at the moment. But if the recession deepens and millennials lose their jobs at scale, then their subscriptions are going to be at risk.
What about the effect on the artist workforce? Speaking of the workforce, the recovery will no doubt not be spread evenly. What happens to the current generation of music creators?
So I think there's the real risk, I would say, is in the middle. Right. So if you're a really big established superstar artist, you probably managed to put a decent amount away and you've got really big income streams and brands are still going to want to work with you and you're still probably going to disproportionate amount of the stream. Sure, you haven't got your live revenue, but you've got so much money coming in from these other places, and if you like Cardi B, go and set yourself a really nice little sort of fan subscription. And, so there's a lot of things that bigger artists can go and do. The small independent artists, and we at MIDiA, we field surveys to them a couple of times a year, and the latest one, checking in and seeing how COVID has changed. And well, most of the smaller independent artists don't have much live income anyway, so they didn't feel the impact as much. Many of them are semi-pro, or enthusiasts who get a reasonable amount of money, but not enough to give up the day job yet. And they predominantly just looking at COVID as great. Okay, I'm spending more time at home, making music, making new songs, doing new collaborations, etc. So the small independent artists who don't rely upon live revenue don't feel the pinch as much. And as many of them are semi-pro or enthusiasts, it's the day job which they're worrying about for money. Superstars not hit. It's the ones in the middle. This like the mainstay of much of the music business. If they're not touring, and the record label isn't maybe doing as well, sort of a year down the line, and through a recession and can't afford to pay them in their advance or sign a new deal with them. I think that's where it starts to get a little bit hairy. And I think there's, most artists who aren't superstars have learned to have many gigs. And I don't mean many gigs as in playing lots of concerts. I mean the many different things that they do. Music teaching has historically been something, do some session work, whatever else. But there's a whole bunch of new tools and platforms which give them ways to make money. You look at Sound Better, and places like Melboss and and Lando. These places have got platforms where artists, whether they are a performing artist, an engineer, a producer, a top liner, whatever it might be, you can go and offer your skills and be paid on a platform to go and do a bit of work for somebody. I think this is a great time for those sorts of platforms to give artists extra little ways to make money. Is it going to replace the money that they're getting from touring? No, but it may be the difference between them being able to make all the rent and the bills at the end of the month versus without.
You were just talking about a little bit about the relationship between performers and writers and labels and publishers. What about labels and publishers during this time? There again, are they facing a fair amount of pain? Is the pain evenly distributed, or are they equally well insulated?
So I would say at the very least, the benefit that rights holders have because of streaming, and let's talk about labels mainly because publishers are more exposed to a whole bunch of other reasons, but labels, at the very least, they have a time delay baked in with streaming. So pre-streaming, when they were relying upon people going and buying things, as soon as people have less spending, then they're going to be less likely to go and buy the new single, buy the new album. So it's a very immediate impact. But if people are subscribing, then people tend, and they've developed habits, if somebody's been subscribing to a music service for a period of sort of months or many months or years, they're going to be reluctant to cancel. So it'll be one of the last things that they want to cut back on. So you've got all of that delay period. So somebody might lose their job on day one, and it might not be until day 90 that they finally decide that they have to cut the Spotify subscription, for example. So that gives you that, at the very least, it gives them a delay period, where they don't actually feel the direct impact of the economy struggling. Ad-supported is really different, and we're already seeing it. We're already seeing sort of ad-supported revenues declining, and that is, thankfully for the music business, ad-supported is a relatively small part of the streaming equation. So, they can still grow streaming revenues, as we saw in the US, just announced from the MIDiA, even with, a softening ad sector. So that means record labels at least have some insulation. What the big record labels in particular, not just the majors, but big independents as well, have done over the last couple of years is release a lot more music and release it a lot more quickly. It's what we sort of call volume and velocity game, because the assumption is there's so much more music being released, we need to release more music. And you can see where that logic eventually goes, but they may end up deciding, actually, it's time to scale back on our A&R expenditure, it's time to scale back on our marketing expenditure, and we're going to focus on making a smaller number of artists extra big rather than a large number of artists reasonably big. That could be one effect. Publishing, very quickly, is publishers are already feeling the pain because they're more exposed to things which are directly impacted by social distancing and lockdown. So before lockdown, everybody used to talk about how publishing has a more diversified revenue base than the record labels. Record labels become overly dependent on streaming, which is true, whereas music publishers have all of these other places that make money from public performance, and radio and live and all these sort of things. But of course, once live stopped and people weren't commuting as much, and when restaurants and bars and clubs are closed and all these places where income used to be generated, well, that is affecting the short to mid-term outlook for publishers. Some of that we won't feel for 12 months or so because there's long delayed payments that happen to rights bodies and whatever else. So even if the economy recovered perfectly tomorrow, and even if COVID went away tomorrow, music publishers are still going to be feeling, in revenue terms, the impact of lockdown in one way or another, potentially for another 12 months, just because of the delays in that money going through the system.
Right, and not to mention the pause in new production of major media products, which rely on sync licensing from both music publishers and record labels in order to license in the music that they want to use.
Yeah, absolutely. Although the couple of people we were talking to, publishers, about sync, they were saying it's a mixed bag. So absolutely, a lot of those big productions stopped. But then once TV broadcasters started to get used to the fact that there's not going to be as big a supply of new drama coming to them, and they don't have the sports to put on, suddenly pushing out lots of other different formats, more chat shows and whatever else. And so that created an extra demand for music. Maybe not the same sort of huge big price points for sort of a flagpole scripted drama, but nonetheless created a new sort of set of demands.
Right, fair enough. Mark Mlligan, thank you, my friend, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Super insightful as always.
Great. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.